Welcome, everybody. I'm Nancy Gibbs. I'm the faculty director of the Shorenstein Center. Welcome also those of you who are watching on the live stream. Our rules are if you ask a question, we take that as consent for us to use that question. I am so excited to have this group of not just creators, but creative individuals here with us. As you know, the Shorenstein Center was originally established to help us understand the role of the press as a critical democratic institution. And for 40 years, it has studied all the different ways that journalism operates in shaping an informed public. It became very clear to us in recent years that we needed to pull that lens way back and really interrogate our definitions, our remit, how we think about how public understanding is formed and shaped, what determines where people go for trusted information and who they decide to trust. And there is more and more research now that indicates that especially younger audiences and global audiences are more inclined to trust the information that they are gaining from individual content creators, online influencers, bloggers, every variety of sort of entrepreneurial information creator. They trust them more than they do many of the traditional institutions that we think of as journalistic institutions or accountability institutions. And so we were very eager to explore this environment broadly, the information environment and the accountability function, so that we can learn and understand better all of the forces from so many different directions that are shaping our discourse right now. We are exceptionally lucky in leading this investigation to have Julia Angwin this year as our Walter Shorenstein Fellow. Julia's extraordinary career has taken her from the San Francisco Chronicle to the Wall Street Journal to ProPublica, Pulitzer Prize along the way, to founding the Markup, and most recently Proof News, which just founded this year. And so Julia brings, and you read it in her New York Times columns, you can read it in all of her writings, I think a terrific lens to this work that really understands the arc of understanding of delivery of information and the tensions and trade-offs and opportunities that that represents. So I'm delighted, Julia, that you're leading this work and will be leading this panel. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Nancy. It's just an honor to be here. It's been a thrill to be a Walter Shorenstein Fellow this year, and my dream was to put on this event to really re-examine what do we consider the core work that I have considered my whole life as a journalist, which is accountability, holding power to account. That is what I got into journalism to do. That is what is my guiding mission for journalism. And along the way, I started to notice that there were other people doing it too who didn't always call themselves journalists. And so this panel is a bunch of people who are in accountability work, another traditional journalist as well, and the rest are, I think of themselves not as journalists, but I see their work as just as crucial towards the creation of accountability in our society as the work that those of us who call ourselves journalists are. So I'm gonna go and sort of introduce you to each one of them and start each one with a question so that you can kind of get to know their work as opposed to just doing an introduction to everybody right now. But I'm going to start with just a small little bit of a rant about trust. Because really, what I think I'm talking about when I'm talking about this work of accountability is who do we trust? Because right now, you may have noticed we're having a trust crisis in America. We have lost faith in government, in corporations, in media, in universities, I'm sorry to say, while sitting here. And I think that an erosion of trust is extremely dangerous. Trust is what holds societies together. And so I think, in particular, um, journalists should worry about this, people who want to hold power to account, because holding power to account the is a work that requires building trust with your audience, with who you're speaking to. And so in a world where no one trusts the dissenters, that is a world we know of as authoritarianism, right? That's a world where, this is what authoritarian regimes do. They destroy the trust in all the trusted sources, and then they say, I'm the only person you can trust. Um, and so I want to sort of ground this whole conversation in how do you build trust? And I think one thing that's really important to think about is that the burden of proof is always higher for those who are challenging power, right? The people who have power, they say a thing is true, everyone believes them. If you're challenging power, where's your evidence? No, I need 7 more citations, etc. And so the people on this panel are the people who do that work, who have to bring mountains and mountains of evidence to their work. And so I am really thrilled to be here with all of them, and I'm going to introduce you to all of their fabulous work, although you may already know them from a platform you watch. I'm going to start at the end with Meredith Lynch. Meredith is an online creator who started off in makeup influencing and then strangely found her way into being basically one of the leading critics of the influence of private equity on society. And as a result, she has received cease and desist letters. She has suffered a lot of the challenges that journalists traditionally have. Now, the thing that Taylor and I have in our traditional newsrooms is lawyers lined up to defend us, which Meredith does not have, I believe. And so I'm hoping to start with you, Meredith, to talk about like how did you get into this accountability work and what has the cost of it been for you?
Sure. I mean, for me, I was a makeup influencer, and one day I saw that Kim Kardashian was starting a private equity firm. And I'm always a little suspicious when the Kardashians do anything. So I Googled private equity bad, and the results were shocking. It really and truly changed my life and changed my perspective. And there's not a lot of people out there talking about private equity, and it is affecting pretty much everyone except the uber wealthy. And I just thought the more light I can bring to this, I have no skin in the game. And so I'm not afraid to say these things. And there's a lot of money. There's a lot of private equity money in media now, and that has its effects on what people can say. And I am not beholden to that, so I can say it.
And you are careful to say the word allegedly in all of your videos.
Yes. Private equity might kill your nana, allegedly, in my opinion.
um, so to your right, to Meredith's right, or I guess to the viewers left, is Yoakum, and am I pronouncing it incorrectly?
Vulcan.
Vulcan, sorry. Who you might know online as Tanner Leatherstein, and he is a leather worker. And what I love is he calls himself a de-influencer because he's essentially what he does is he buys extremely expensive luxury bags and then cuts them open on camera and dissects them and tells you what the real quality is, which I think is amazing given that like for years and years and years I have read all kinds of quote fashion journalism and I've never seen this type of accountability. It's a real gift to the audience to find out what's really going on under the $3,000 bag. And so I guess the question I have for you, Yoakum, is how did you get into doing this and how do you afford to buy these thousands of dollar bags and then destroy them?
Well, good questions. I didn't plan any of this. I started into leather as my family owned a tannery in Turkey. And 10, 11 years old, I started making leather in the tannery. It started as a game and turned into a passion. And my friends always ask me, hey, I bought this bag, jacket, or whatever it is. Is it good? Is it worth it? And up until 2, 3 years ago, I just added all these points together, and people love leather. They want to use it, but they're not particularly comfortable making those decisions because they're just bombarded with marketing. And when things are expensive, they assume it's good, it's expensive because it's great leather. And I was curious myself too. I bought a Louis Vuitton bag. I dissected myself, made a video just to understand what was it. I couldn't find much money evidence behind it. So then I started to share it on social media, and some of the videos went viral. People kept asking me, "Can you do that brand, this bag?" And obviously, it become a form of entertainment for my life and for my audience at this point. So
And can you share with us the amount of money you've spent on bags so far that you have destroyed?
I track the expensive ones. I am buying like expensive, non-expensive bags. It's over $75,000 at this point. And I see it as um, like a investment, building a personal brand, a trust in front of my audience. I have an indirect benefit to it. I also make my own leather crafts, which was my business my entire life. And I don't mention that a lot in my videos, but people figured it out by Googling me and stuff like that. So there is an indirect impact to my brand. That definitely helps me cover the cost at this point.
Have you made enough? Have you seen increase in sales in your
Yeah,
business?
my organic increase accelerated after the popularity of the videos for sure.
Um, well, it's super fun to watch. If any of you haven't seen, I really recommend. There's something so satisfying about
Something
watching the
painful or
slice open. um, so next is Ernest. Ernest is an educator on Black history on TikTok and Instagram. And, you know, I think that it's worth pointing out that just stating facts about Black history is currently extremely radical, right? There are a lot of states that are trying to ban this history. And luckily for you, for your videos, you are still out there providing this education that is becoming actually scarce. From I have learned so much from your videos. It's actually kind of shocking. Like I'm just going to mention a few things that probably none of you know about a Black man who walked who was named the Planet Walker, John Francis. He walked for 17 years to protest the environmental destruction that we were doing to our planet and didn't speak for many of those years because he wanted to just listen to people. Um, I learned that the founder of Red Lobster refused to comply with Jim Crow laws and was like actually really suffered and was a huge ally to the cause. I learned about this guy Bruce Clunder, a minister who was protesting school segregation, lay down in front of a bulldozer, and they ran him over and killed him. So, I mean, these are incredible things that I've learned from Ernest, and I'd love to hear how you got into this work and what it has cost you.
Yeah, so for me, I entered this space as a creator, I would say with the onset of Facebook, because my first year in college, Facebook was in its infancy, like its first or second year. And I was on the verge of flunking out of college, and I decided to take a Black History course to see if I would like it. I never had a chance to take one in school. And there was just like a switch that went off in my mind. I did a complete 180 from almost flunking out to being inspired to go to class first, sit in the front row, actually I love to read for the first time. And what I would do is I would go home because you had to like go home to get on social media then. I would log on to my laptop and Facebook had this new feature called the share, right? Status, share your status. So I would type up something like, did you all know this, right? And people often didn't. I just always felt like this information should be like you shouldn't have to pay a fee for this. You should learn this in school. And I took that to wanting to be a teacher. Eventually, unfortunately, I dealt with the hate crime in 2016. And that was when I started to create content because then it was for justice for myself and for my wife. But the desire to not only share this information, but also use it to advocate for justice emerged. So I created Facebook and Instagram content. Then 2021, I create TikTok content. And the desire for me is if I know that for me, it helped me fight through a case and also it helped me graduate with honors by learning this information. What could it do for people who aren't taught this in school? So it drives me knowing that I'm going to give somebody one piece of information that can completely flip their perspective. And I feel like I'm doing something right because, like you said, it's being banned in the same manner that education was literally banned from my ancestors. So because it can truly liberate us all and bring us closer together.
You mentioned this hate crime. Are you okay to share
Yeah,
with
yeah.
us what happened?
Yeah, yeah. So I was a teacher for about 6 years at that point. It was 2016. My wife and I, both educators, we were at an event in Chicago, And because we grabbed the beanbag that we thought somebody was done using, it was a white lady who was with another white lady and two black folks. She began to yell at us and everything, and it escalated. We're cursing at each other, and she begins to call us the N word over the bag. So I just took my phone out, and for me, that was the way to hold her accountable. Essentially, I didn't believe that I would have any body on the other side that would protect me in that situation. Of course, she was also calling the cops in the direction. So it escalated to the point where she spat on us. And at that point, knowing my rights as a history educator who sometimes taught government, then it becomes, well, I can share this online because she gets kicked out, but we don't know who she is. So my first piece of public content was help us get justice in that situation. And as I'm fighting for myself, I become aware of so many other things and realizing that most people in my community who are not pushing forward with this is because they don't understand they have the ability to, and they might not also understand the way the law can work too. So how can I help advocate in that manner? And I kind of just took that and just said, how can I help others the same way I was helped with this?
That's such a great accountability story. And I think I just want to interject here that like that's something that as a journalist, my whole life, we would have been told in our newsroom that's too small to cover, right? Like that's not a story, that's just one incident. And so those types of stories were never covered until social media. And so for all of the people who are creating this moral panic right now about how social media is ruining everyone's brains, I think it's also worth just remembering it is a tool that's given voice to people who were not given voice by a lot of mainstream institutions in the past. Okay, Sam. So Sam is a YouTube content creator and has doing that full time for 8 years. So basically, a veteran slash OG inventor of this whole space. um, and what I love about Sam's videos is that they embody what I think is so important about the area that I call explanatory journalism. And inside of newsrooms where I have been mostly labeled an investigative reporter, and that has like more prestige than sort of explanatory. But in reality, I believe explanatory journalism is in some ways often the highest form of accountability because it is not tied to the myth of novelty, right? So journalism is always caught up in this idea of like what's new and fresh and that is very much um, fun. It's candy though, right? And the reality is, a lot of the things that are really important that we should be discussing in society are not new. They're really old, like systemic racism, or And so Sam covers those topics that are actually just they're slowly happening in front of our eyes, but aren't fully being captured. And I would love to hear, Sam, how you got into this work and whether you see it as accountability work the way that I do.
I definitely do not see it as accountability work, and I think a lot of that comes from what led me to doing this, which is really just following what the audience has sort of wanted and desired. I think one thing that's interesting about this sort of video is that we can really see both through analytics and through revenue that it is what the audience wants. One interesting thing one interesting way that you can do that is actually you can sort of use advertising dollars as a proxy for audience engagement because usually audience engagement in the true sense, not the buzzword sense, like truly how engaged an audience is, that correlates to advertising success both through systems like AdSense and sponsorship. And what we see consistently is that when we do work that you might describe as accountability, and we would just call an explanatory video with a little bit of a political twist and some opinion, maybe, like that is what performs best because the audience gets wrapped into that. So to be honest, we've sort of followed audience desires, and it's clear that there's really an appetite for this sort of thing. So it works out well that both it kind of pays the bills and gives us a job, but also it seems to hopefully do some social good.
And I think it's worth pointing out that the YouTube platform is like a more mature platform in terms of monetization, and that's where you mostly work. The TikTok creators on this panel, I think first of all, just been banned, and secondly, doesn't have as rich a monetization setup, and so it does seem like YouTube is able to slightly better align with the audience interests and providing that stability of support for creators like yourself. I do want to have a quick follow up for you though, because one thing I find interesting about your work is that there's a myth out there that creators always it's all very personality driven, and you never put your face in there, and that I think is such an interesting choice, and it gives me hope that it doesn't have to always be about the personality.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no, I'd say, because on the one hand, like clearly I'm not on camera in this, and I'm not an on-camera creator. And to be honest, I have fairly strong opinions that in this genre, it is actually improved by not having an on-camera personality. Because in a lot of cases, with the explainery videos, it's like there's a lot of visual information that can be included, and so anytime you see a face, that's a time when you're not getting sort of that secondary track of information through visuals. The face is just it's kind of valueless in that case, whereas even just footage, even just properly selected stock footage is of value towards pushing forward your understanding of something. But on the other hand, like, I do think that there is a personality in there, because underlying that sort of what is perceived by a lot of audience incorrectly, I believe, as unbiased commentary, is personal bias and is opinion, that it is a certain view onto topics. And it is clear, at least to me, for a lot of complicated reasons we don't have time for, that like that sort of subtle bias and subtle more so point of view on a topic that could be characterized as a personality, that does create value, and that does create that audience attachment that ultimately leads to what we were talking about earlier with commercial success.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it's also worth just noting that this idea that there's some mythical objective human out there who has no bias and is going to bring you the facts
Mhm.
undiluted is not true, right? And so I appreciate you acknowledging that it's always going to be biased, and you're choosing which kind of person you want to hear from. Um, so next up, we have Taylor. Taylor is actually a legend and possibly doesn't need introduction, but Taylor Lorenz is, a journalist at the Washington Post. Just launched a podcast with Vox. Wrote this book, Extremely Online, that is a history basically of sort of the creator economy, and has been covering the creator. She's really one of the only journalists. I'm sure there are a few more, but who take this group of people seriously the way that they should be taken and not treated as like there is a genre of journalism that's like, look what the kids are up to these days, and that is not Taylor. In fact, she's really brought to light like important things like this dangerous creator Libs of TikTok, who really actually incites harassment against people. And so I just would love to hear your story of how you got into this space, and how what are the costs for you in journalism of taking this seriously?
Yeah. Can everyone hear me? Sorry. So I started as a blogger back in 2009 when that bloggers were sort of content creators, and I got very popular on Tumblr. When I started writing, at that time, the mainstream media was extremely condescending about content creators, and I saw the way they were writing about fellow bloggers and early YouTubers, a lot of whom were my friends, that like first generation. People used to talk about, YouTube as a site for cat videos and just not take it seriously. And so I wanted to write stories about the internet, and especially about teen girls on the internet and emergent youth behavior on the internet, content creators that was really taking it seriously, and also looking at it from a business standpoint as this emergent industry. And then an emergent industry that was increasingly shaping our media and political ecosystem. So especially since 2016, 2015, 2016, really after Gamergate, I started to cover a lot more of the extremist creators as well, and sort of their integration in the far right. And then I cover, yeah, a lot of TikTok stuff as well. And I create a lot of content all day on every
Yeah,
app.
I mean, you're kind of a creator too, right? You're on all the platforms, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't understand how you do any work because you're posting all the time on every single
I
platform.
do miss my deadlines sometimes.
But one thing I want to say about your book, Extremely Online, which I just loved, is that it really highlighted something that I hadn't really crystallized myself until you said it, which was that how there was a history of female voices really leading the era of creators because this is mommy bloggers who you started with really like didn't have a space. Like the world would like if you as me as a young mother a while back. I'm not going to say the number of years. There was like Cosmopolitan magazine or Parenting magazine, and like that was it. Like it wasn't really a lot of shared experience about like what were the real experiences of moms. And I love that you sort of traced it back to that because when I wrote my book about MySpace.
Very excited, by the way, so much. Your book was so foundational for my book.
Thank you. So I wrote a book about MySpace back in 2009 because I was like, social media is going to be big, and I was right. I mean, I should have written the book on Facebook, but whatever. But MySpace was really interesting because it was driven by the idea that you could sort of decorate your page yourself, which really was something that teen girls were into because it was like the way that they decorate their lockers and their book covers and stuff. And so it really was driven by this sort of female aesthetic. And I hadn't put it together in my mind till I read yours that had continued on throughout all the platforms.
Also, yeah, you also even hear it in the language. I mean, there's so much stigma. The reason why the media didn't take the content creator industry seriously was because it was completely dominated by women, a lot of young women, a lot of people of color, a lot of LGBTQ creators. Like if you look at that first class from 2007 to 2010 of content creators, it was Tyler Oakley, it was Tay Zonday, it was these like marginalized voices that wouldn't have had a voice in the mainstream media. When a lot of influencers pioneered these revenue models, I wrote a piece a while ago, but they were called influencers because the marketing industry has always used that term. Now you hear people today say, oh, I don't like to identify as an influencer. When you dig down to why they prefer to be called a creator, they often repeat a lot of misogynistic tropes that are just associated with that word. Like, oh, these women, they're vapid, they just take selfies. That was never the case. And even as Mr. Beast, the biggest creator in the world, has said, like, beauty bloggers pioneered so many revenue streams and productization of them, like in a way that now these big creators can build on. So I think women played such a key role in the internet history.
Yeah, well, thank you for chronicling. So Dr. Siab has a day job as a doctor at a I don't know if you like to say where your location is. So, but at a hospital, and but spends a lot of time debunking medical misinformation on TikTok, which is rampant. I mean, during COVID, you were really busy, and then I kind of thought maybe it was going to subside, but strangely, no, it just continues. And so, I'd love to hear about how you got into doing this, and then how you balance it with like an actual, real, very demanding job.
So I'm a cardiologist. I'm in Minnesota now, northern Minnesota. I love it. I love living there. I got started 3 years ago, March of 2021. The vaccines had just come out in a couple of months. The healthcare workers were getting it. I'd gotten it. And, you might remember there was a glimmer of hope, right? Like things might be starting to turn around finally. And I kind of, what I have today is a total accident. I mean, I never would have expected or even imagined something like that. My TikTok started out of boredom because it was the depths of the pandemic still, and everything was closed, and we didn't have anything. I would go to work, I would come home, go to work, come home. I was going crazy. So I started it as a joke. You see these medical videos, humor videos of doctors making funny stuff. That's how I started, and the idea of me putting my face on video was never something that I couldn't even think about it. It was very awkward for me. But anyway, I started as a joke, and then I kind of discovered the sea and oceans of misinformation and disinformation about COVID, the vaccines, and people just straight up lying on social media. And if you know TikTok, Facebook, I mean, you know how easy it is just to make up things. And being in my position as a physician, I lived in a bubble at the time. Everybody I knew in my circle, we all thought the same things. We're like, of course we're gonna get vaccinated. I mean, it was obviously, but then you step outside that bubble and you're like, no, there are a lot of people that have a lot of opinions. And there's a lot of misinformation and there's a lot of confusion because the general public is afraid. I mean, these vaccines are new. It's a newer application of the technology because it's been around for decades, but it's the first time we've used it to actually make something mass produced. But anyway, there's a lot of confusion. So I found myself kind of just debunking a lot of the stuff I saw. And you would think that talking about science and medicine and facts would not be polarizing or political, but unfortunately that's not true. And I realized at that time that medicine is inherently political. And people that say that it's not political are wrong, because the whole pandemic was politicized, right? It was left or right, and vaccines are politicized, and people make decisions based on their political beliefs. It doesn't matter what the science says, what the fact says. Even if you show them graphs where you say, hey, red states mortality is way up here and blue states are way down here, it doesn't matter to them because of their political beliefs. So I found myself educating people, really breaking down the science, and as best as I could in 1 minute videos, talking about why, why COVID is bad and why you want to get vaccinated and why the vaccine isn't going to make you magnetic, or it's not the devil, or it's not gene therapy. And I'm like trying to explain high school biology to people. It was just changed my whole worldview on how things work in this country, I guess. But anyway, so then I was the right person at the right time doing the right thing, I think, because COVID was a hot topic, still is, but not as much as it was before. And the Delta variant came around, so I found myself educating and informing people. And then Omicron happened, and the whole vaccine sort of misinformation continued. And before I knew it, I had all these followers that came out of nowhere almost. But I think people kind of liked how I talked about things. And you mentioned not having like your face on camera, but for me, people liked my facial expressions, I guess, and hand gestures. It was relatable, right? I'm just a regular guy walking down the street in my scrubs. My hair looks like crap. It doesn't matter. It's like you're talking to a friend of yours about this rather than, a talking head on CNN. I'm not Sanjay Gupta on CNN talking about this, right? So it's very relatable. And then it's not just holding other people accountable, meaning other creators or other people that are spreading misinformation. I found myself holding the CDC accountable for what they said. And I'm like, who am I to talk about the CDC saying something wrong? Like, I'm a cardiologist. I'm not an infectious disease doctor. But at the end of the day, all of us do sort of explanatory work where we try to explain what these big agencies are saying and how, at the time, that trickles down to the general person on the street. It is twisted, manipulated, and distorted by people with agendas to mean something completely different. So I found myself explaining, hey, this is not what they said. The CDC said this. That's not what they meant. What they meant was this, but they could have said it better. And then, anyway, so it kind of morphed from there. And now, over the last few months, I've pivoted to talking about cardiology and more general cardiology content. I just educate people on heart issues, and that is a whole different ballgame and a whole different Pandora's box of issues, because people tell me that I've told them things that their cardiologist never did. So what you said in terms of finding a purpose in doing what you do, what drives me is helping people in some way, and public service, and just sort of, if somebody can understand their own medical condition better or their family's medical condition better because of what I do, that's enough for me. And then also, I don't monetize my content. I've made zero money. I've been accused of being a Pfizer shield so many times. I should probably just ask Pfizer to pay me, because it's just unpaid promotion for them. But I don't monetize. So the optics, I realize the optics of talking about vaccines or medicines, when you're being paid by companies to talk about them. So that also adds, I guess, to the trust. So
Yeah. I mean, I will say that you haven't watched his videos. His face is so expressive. So he'll do like a little split screen with somebody who's saying, like, "Oh, if you just take this one vitamin or whatever,"
the green screen, and it's like people. I'm just like, how are people like? It's somebody talking about some supplement or this or that. I'm like rolling my eyes, and you can see my
Yeah.
little face in the corner.
It's-
So to that, it's sort of it's like my trademark, and people
Yeah.
recognize that. And whenever something pops up and they see my face, they're like, I know this is gonna be good.
Yeah. It is really satisfying to watch. And I think it leads me to a point, which I think one of the reasons I feel like that there is some trust in creators like you is actually that some other creator will call you out. So there's a vibrancy to this community where in the comments, the viewers will call you out. People in TikTok will do these duets with you. I am on YouTube. They make other YouTube videos commenting on your YouTube video. And so I think that actually helps people vet the creators, and it makes them more trustworthy in a way that I think perhaps like traditional media brands, because they don't interact with each other as much, it doesn't have the same network effect. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, TikTok users are vicious. I mean, they are, and rightfully so, because they're very protective of each other and their community as well. Especially this TikTok ban has been very upsetting for a lot of us in the community, because 170 million Americans use TikTok. And TikTok, especially for medical information and public health information, people will literally search their symptoms on TikTok. Like if you go and search chest pain or palpitations, they're not going to doctors because they've never gotten answers from their doctors. They search palpitations on TikTok, and they'll get all sorts of garbage that comes up saying, take cayenne pepper to treat your heart attack, which is just like malpractice. But hopefully, with my videos now, my videos sort of pop up near the top of these specifics
Yeah.
terms so that they get educated. So, but then they hold me accountable too, because I would dare not say something that's wrong because I will get eaten up and thrown out, and my credibility is gone.
Yeah.
The accountability happens right away. They comment things, they're like, "Oh, wait, you're wrong," or you should
It's
consider
instant,
that.
right?
It's
I mean,
instant.
Vulcan, you were saying that as soon as you post your video, you go online for an hour and you just basically find out whether somebody's going to rip you apart, right?
Yes, basically I spare 1 hour per video. Um, these days I'm focusing on YouTube, but I do it in Instagram too. Read the first comments, respond to them. Sometimes they call you out. It's your cost estimate is off. Maybe it's a person who is just a small craftsman used to pay high prices, but then another person come in and like I work in the factory that makes that bag. He's scarily wrong, and then people are like, I see what's going on in the accuracy of my estimates or information. I get a relief. I'm like, okay, this is not going that bad in that case, and then improve my things going forward. So that 1 hour gives me immediate feedback from that so many little data points. People, and especially the topics are usually emotionally polarized. There are fans of these luxury brands, and there are haters. They start fighting, and it generates information for me to learn and for us to get better very quickly.
Sam, you were talking about how in YouTube, your videos, you actually just add citations. It's easier to do in YouTube, right? In order to like help bolster your claims.
Yeah, it's kind of become common practice, I'd say, in kind of the quote unquote educational sphere of YouTube because the audience certainly appreciates them, although it's easy to tell they almost never actually go to them. But the idea of them being there, certainly, like the audience almost expects that these days,
Yeah.
I'd say, on YouTube. And you do like it wasn't that way maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but these days, like if someone uploads what is, clearly, cleanly kind of an educational video and you don't have them, they will get called out for that.
Yeah. I mean, Meredith, you do this a lot with the what you call the receipts on the green screen behind you, which I think I, as a watcher of your content, I appreciate. And yet I actually, when I think about it, I never read any of them. I mean, I just see them there. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I think to your point, they're kind of there to support it. And I also, for legal purposes, do it too. I do think that it detracts, if I say the mortality rates of private equity owned nursing homes are higher than non private equity. That's a very big claim. And private equity firms, spoiler alert, have a lot more money than Meredith Lynch. So when I say that and I show them, look, I have this study from Duke, I'm not quoting here, but there's lots of studies out there that show this. I do think that it can get people to buy in and also detract someone from saying negative feedback or saying, oh wow, this person did do their research.
I'm curious because, in newsrooms, for Taylor and I in traditional newsrooms, like you would have a lawyer read your story before you publish for something that was making a claim like that, and then also defend you when there's an inevitable, mean letter, et cetera, legal lawsuit threat, et cetera. And do any of you have lawyers who do that for you? Yes.
Yes.
So you do.
I have a lawyer on retainer now. Yes. I didn't when I started.
Yeah. And Sam, you also do? Yeah. So this is a luxury of getting to a certain size and income level. Right.
And also a necessity at the same
Yeah. Yeah.
I do not, and I've had to be very careful because, as I said, you wouldn't believe science and medicine are controversial. So when I was talking about COVID and the vaccines, I would get a lot of nasty messages, as you can imagine. And I've tried to anonymize myself in the sense my name's out there, but I don't publicize where I work. But you can Google me, you'll find out where I work. Right? So there's always that sort of danger of putting yourself out there in a position where you're talking about things where people that are not very nice may not like those, and then they try to come find you and things. So there's that danger, which is very true. But also when I talk about, misinformation, I sometimes have to call out specific companies, right? So if I say that this supplement company that is advertising that this supplement is going to boost your immune system or improve your heart health or whatever it is, and you're giving them $90 a month to do that, it is not accurate. These claims are not supported by science. So there's always a risk that they come after you for libel or defamation or whatever that might be, or even individuals, right? So I've had to address claims made by, unfortunately, other physicians, which is very unfortunate. And I've had to worry about them sort of coming after me for defamation. And I'm just a one-man person who does this as a hobby on his downtime in my car. I mean, I'm not a full operation, so I don't have lawyers and stuff. So I've had to be careful about that and think about how I say things. As
I think
you
it's
said.
very important too that you all are citing your work and trying to show people, because as a former classroom teacher, and I was creating as I was teaching, so I was seeing this in real time. This has evolved quicker than our curriculums that have taught us how to teach kids how to actually, critique things for credibility. Like we come from an era when we were taught in school, go to the library, get a couple sources, look at the journals, and before you know it, now it's like a kid can learn this whole thing from a video, a TikTok video that isn't cited, and you don't know it, or they might just be citing the Wikipedia files as if that's actual fact without back checking it. So this is important work right here, because we have to understand too that not only is our credibility at risk, but like we could be leading people astray because of the platforms we build, and that subsequently can lead the future astray. And I've seen that firsthand in the classroom with kids coming up to me as they know I'm creating content. And they say, "Mr. Krim, is this right here true about so and so?" And I'm like, and instead of just getting frustrated, I'm understanding why they would feel that way. So we sit down, instead of talking to him one on one, we look at it as a whole class. Let's actually break this down and see what's true, what's conjecture, and why we should fact check this at all costs.
It does seem like being a teacher of teenagers was a good practice for
Yeah,
becoming a
yeah.
TikToker.
Right, right.
Equally vicious
Exactly.
audiences.
If I could deal with those comments, if I could deal with me teaching what I think is the best lesson ever, and everybody looking at their cell phone, hey, I can take a negative comment or two.
So I want to ask you all about the TikTok ban because it's gone through. The president has signed it. And I think honestly, I don't know. I personally feel like I'm still sort of in shock that like this happened so quickly, and it does feel like a blow to accountability. There's a lot of accountability work that was being done on TikTok, and I think on YouTube too. But TikTok, it had this ability for new creators to burst through in a way that I think YouTube, like Sam, you're already like an established YouTuber, right? And so like it is harder, I think, for a new entity to break through on YouTube. And so I'm worried about what this means for accountability. What anyone want to jump in on what they're planning to do about this? Like, are you moving to other
Can
platforms?
I just say
Yeah,
one thing,
yeah.
which is that that's the point. Like, I think that's the whole reason. I mean, if you look at our reporting at the Post, I know the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times also reported, but the motivation that what reinvigorated, this bipartisan support to pass this bill is a conversation about Gaza, and actually quite extremely bad, misleading study that the New York Times amplified uncritically, despite the fact that it was completely wrong, about sort of like discussion on Gaza on the platform. And I've also written, and I'm currently writing also about Biden's sort of shifting relationship with content creators and just the anger and hostility his team has towards these progressive content creators on TikTok. And so I think a lot of it is, I think that's part of the goal. I don't think that's everyone's goal. I think, of course, there's security concerns that could be legitimate, although we've not, again, not seen proof of anything that they're alleging. But I think, anyway, I just
Yeah.
think it's like important to note that like that is part of what led to the ban.
Yeah, it does feel like there's a lot of things that people say on a lot of platforms, and the fact that TikTok, I think, was leaning pretty progressive, does feel like it might have played
You have
into
like
it.
Lindsey Graham saying that it's like, whatever he said, like turning kids against the state of Israel or whatever.
Right.
Like, and I just think when you actually listen to the congressional testimony when the CEO was in front of Congress a couple months ago, as well as recently, like they talk about the content on the app
Yeah.
being problematic.
Yeah.
And I think that's
It
concerning.
is funny. It does feel like there's more conversation about Gaza than China, and China is allegedly the reason.
Well, there's never really been much conversation, but it was a complete lie that the app ever censored content about Tiananmen Square or anything. You can find plenty of content about that on the app.
In fact, there's a hilarious thing where people just post content about Tiananmen Square in order to see if they can get it banned, and
And
no
it
one
always goes, the Post famously did this experiment where they tried to get censored on TikTok and found that it actually performed better.
can. Right.
I have two comments on that. And to your point about TikTok being something that anybody can use, all you need is a phone with a camera and a internet connection and something you want to say. That's all you need, and that's how I got my start. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's you could literally be on your couch making a video, no filter, nothing, no fancy editing, and as long as you have something to say that relates with people, you'll do well. You'll find your community no matter what it is. So it allows it has democratized free speech, like you were talking about earlier. Literally anybody can get a voice, and I think that's one of the great things about the platform. I think it's one of the best ways for public health education, messaging on a wide public scale. 170 million Americans use it, as I said, on an almost daily basis. And I don't know if it's actually going to happen or not, but if TikTok goes away, it'll be a big blow, I think, to not just free speech, but also just messaging in terms of public health, education, or even what you anything. I mean, Black history, whatever it is that you're trying to raise awareness on. And I think the Democrat, well, I don't want to politicize this, but they've really shot themselves in the foot because the generation that got them elected and the people that got them the midterm wins and all these things, they are on TikTok. I mean, these are the people that use TikTok to galvanize people to go out and vote, right? And we talked about Congressman Jeff Jackson earlier that used TikTok as his platform and then sort of threw his own followers under the bus. And now he's being rightfully roasted by his followers on TikTok, and he'll never have the same credibility that he did before. So that's number one. I think it's a big mistake. And what you said about Gaza is completely accurate. I think is that TikTok is democratic. As I said, literally anybody can make a video and get exposure. We are seeing direct video evidence from the ground in Gaza about what's going on. It does not have to go through mainstream media anymore, right? The people that are, we've not had this level of conversation about Gaza, Israel, uh, that we have now, I think compared to 10 years ago or 15 years ago, a lot more people are talking about it because we have that direct video evidence coming through and people can see for them with their own eyes instead of it being filtered through, I think, social mainstream media. I think that's what has got people worried about TikTok. But that's all I'll say without getting in trouble. But you get,
I don't think we have the mass protests at college campuses around the country right now, or the world too, without TikTok. We don't have movements for justice and equity for my generation without Facebook. I mean, it did the same thing for our generation. So for me as an historian, this sounds like the demonization of jazz music 100 years ago, the demonization of rock and roll music, hip hop music. I mean, literally anything that was youth led that was giving people a voice. I mean, Chuck D said hip hop was the CNN of the hood. These are voices that people usually overlook. And TikTok is doing that for a young generation. And besides the fact that it's leading to this education, like TikTok literally in social media is filling in the gaps because we don't even realize what we weren't taught until we come across that creator that's teaching us these things that we weren't able to learn in class. So if this ban goes through, and especially because these parties never agree on things for the most part, especially like domestic issues, but they agree on this. I think that it's going to have a more deleterious impact than they can imagine with this group coming up because the way these kids are protesting now, they will be the adults soon. And how is that going to play into, how they view this democracy in this society, and how is it going to play into what they're willing to actually believe? Every generation goes through this. You kids don't know what you're talking about. Listen to me. Like the same thing. So how can we sit on our high horse and tell them this is wrong as opposed to teaching them how they should actually look at it through a critical lens?
Yeah. And are you guys planning to move to other platforms? Those of you who are primarily TikTok?
Been lucky enough to have my Instagram grow over the past, and that's one of the most difficult things. But that's helped out a lot. And honestly, I'm at a point now where my Instagram, even though it has less followers, I get more content deals through that platform because TikTok is really just so inconsistent, especially for the type of content I make.
Yeah.
I think it's true for most type of same experience with me. I had zero followers in all platforms. I didn't even know how to use social media, but things started in TikTok and my videos got millions of views repeatedly. Like once they requested me to do the same thing, then I start posting the same ones on Instagram just for fun. And a couple months after, it started trailing, like it started growing as fast. But then once Instagram grows, it started to give me much more consistent views because it works differently. So beauty of TikTok was you can be nobody and you have a passionate message that resonates. You can become very quickly in front of people. Instagram, it's a lot harder. But once you build Instagram, probably like it was a good thing we did at that point. Now we can get that platform to keep talking even if TikTok goes away. So I'm focusing on Instagram and YouTube these days.
And I'm curious if there's something you want journalists other than Taylor Lorenz to understand about the creator economy and how it's covered, because I think I don't know how many of you are reporters seek out for interviews or not, but it is
Yeah.
it does feel to me like there's still a divide, and particularly in the way that how seriously your field is taken. And so wondering if anyone has.
I got a lot of interview requests. I think because of the nature of the content, it's interesting.
Yeah.
They just like to put it in their outlet because nobody buys a $3,000 bag to cut it up. It kind of the different nature of it gets attention. That's why I got pretty positive, um, like credibility even from news outlets. They featured it, they covered it. They constantly keep reaching out for opinion on anything they're writing about the leather space. So for me, it was a very pleasant experience. I didn't really see a negative thing from the media coming for my content so far.
Yeah, I've had a pretty positive experience too. I mean, back in the day when people, media outlets saw that I had been doing this for a while, they would reach out for, to me for comment on COVID and vaccines and stuff. But now somebody will reach out for me to give comment on how coffee affects the heart and things like that because they see my videos talking about how you shouldn't be drinking 10 energy drinks a day and how that's bad for your heart, you know, caffeine. You wouldn't think that that's true, but you go on TikTok, you'll see that young kids having heart attacks after drinking 10 energy drinks a day. But anyway, yes, I have my videos. My videos will sometimes end up on in the New York Post and the Daily Mail and tabloids, and I'm like, how did that happen? I won't even know that they do. People tell me, and that's usually because there's some influencer, wellness influencer, talking about how they can cure your eyesight and you don't need glasses by just some sort of mind voodoo and
And I think there's actually quite, I mean, I know you guys have had a positive relationship. As somebody that's actually covered the industry, there's a lot of hostility towards the media, especially among in the YouTube world. And I think that has been from not always fair reporting, or somebody sort of coming. Jack Nicklaus, a friend of mine, wrote this story about PewDiePie in 2017 that ultimately got his Maker deal canceled and was sort of canceled. You know, wrote about this sort of very racist prank that he did. I think that a lot of times the fans, and I've experienced this myself writing about big creators, like they feel like, who is this person from the traditional media? If you report critically, even slight criticism is taken so personally. And I do think from the creator standpoint, they feel like this media person doesn't understand them, or maybe saw one video, or maybe even got information. I mean, I get sourced all the time. One YouTuber has drama on another YouTuber. And so they are like, why don't you write an article about how bad this guy is? And here's all the receipts. And sometimes that is good. Sometimes they're correct, that is newsworthy. But a lot of times it's sort of, I don't know. I would be curious. You're more in the YouTube space, but I think traditionally YouTubers especially have a different relationship with the press than TikTok content creators.
I mean, I think potentially it could be partially based on the age of YouTube,
Yeah.
and therefore a lot of YouTubers might be still in the mindset of circa 5, even 10 years ago, where, like you were talking about, there is this sort of, I mean, media does not take YouTubers seriously in the slightest. And therefore, I think there's an inherent skepticism about any sort of coverage because it's very rare that someone comes in with context to report on it. I mean, less and less rare these days. But
Also, like you, I mean, I write a lot of bad behavior of like the platforms themselves, or like YouTube showing bad content, and then YouTube, you know, saying, okay, well, that like advertisers leaving a platform, like, and I think often creators blame the journalists for writing about that rather than the platform.
well, I think one thing that you might be actually more familiar than me about, but there was, of course, that era where a lot of ad dollars were lost because of a sort of media fixation off of edge cases. I think around PewDiePie, right?
Yeah.
And that led to very real impacts, very significant impacts among some of these early creator businesses, where to the point where layoffs happen and stuff like that. So I think because of there is this dynamic of sort of often media comes in with critique. It's rare, of course. I mean, media inherently is about critique, but like it's rare that media is coming in to talk about how impressive it is that these creator businesses are built or something like that. It's always the opposite. So therefore, there's that skepticism, and also one experiences the downstream effects of that because when the sort of when the legitimate coverage is more often than not critical, and the advertisers are looking at that, critical coverage, it sort of creates this cycle where inherently, well, at least the perception, I think, is that media coverage is bad.
Yeah.
I mean, media coverage does sort of, what's the, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Like, I mean, there is a bias towards covering problems because like that's our job in society is to cover problems. But there's also lots of laudatory coverage of like big profiles of Mr. Beast and Marcus
But it's funny,
Brownlee, right?
so I wrote like one of the first big profiles of Mr. Beast and for the New York Times,
Mm.
and it was like a 2,500 word story. There was maybe one paragraph about disputes, early on, like many content creators, he hired his friends.
Yep.
And he didn't have a great relationship with some of those people, and he signed them to extremely restrictive NDAs, and there was all this drama. We mentioned that, and just some of his labor practices. That got my parents swatted. I mean, like his fans went so ballistic, and also partially because this guy Phil DeFranco, who by the way got a Google News partnership, made a whole video saying the New York Times is canceling Mr. Beast for one of the most positive profiles I think we have ever run on the business
Wow.
section. I just think the fan, and granted, his fans, as Sam mentioned, are children. His fans are
Yep.
children. Most of the people that were carrying out these attacks were children, but I think it's hard because, and I know a lot of journalists experience this that cover pop culture too. Like my friend covers the Disney Marvel fandoms. Like the stakes for journalists are high to cover any kind of fandom, and YouTuber fandoms are particularly intense.
Yeah, and that is one thing about this type of accountability work is it's very personal, right? Like it's your face and you're saying like whereas, I have traditionally just done my work and printed it, put it in words, and then I don't have to like sit in front of I mean, I will do an interview or a radio interview or something, but it wasn't the same personal experience. And I am curious, have all of you had harassment, stalking? Is that like a common thing? Has everybody had that experience?
Interesting for my experience is I dealt with more of that when I was fighting for my actual case on
Mm,
social media. I got a physical piece of hate mail when after I posted the video in 2016. So I think that's kind of gave me the courage to say, well, if I can deal with this
Yep.
and keep going, then a comment on social media is really nothing. And I kind of have this philosophy that I'm working through constantly, kind of like you said. Like I'll check usually the first 30 minutes or an hour. I kind of look at the comments, I'll respond because it kind of feels like a job though. Like I know I want to interact, but I have to protect my mindset too because if somebody says something that's particularly triggering to me, honestly, there's nothing I can say that's going to convince them otherwise. And unless we face-to-face conversation is different. So I try to just really post and leave. In the Instagram, they have the message request folder. Honestly, 99% of what I get is very, very positive. It sometimes shocks me too because of like the nature and like I advocate for a lot of people too. So I don't really get anything that's that crazy. Now TikTok can sometimes be different. But I think it's important for us as creators as well that we have to protect our peace, especially because we put so much work into it. And oftentimes it's easy for me to walk away because I know it's researched, I know what the truth is, and I know when I'm saying something that has a limitation, I'll say that too. So I feel comfortable saying that once I post, publish, or share, that it just is what it is. And I'm just gonna move on to the next thing.
Also, I think it's up to creators to cultivate their own community.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
actually, speaking of the Mr. Beast thing, like Jimmy, to his credit, is like, don't do that anymore, kind of. And I think handled it well. I think other content creators, Jake Paul, other people, like they lean into the controversy, they
Mhm.
want the controversy. I mean, I see that especially in the medical space or the wellness space, or even with like pop culture, some of the stuff you cover, like some people sort of like court that kind of drama.
I think it's really shown how intense parasocial relationships can become. And I think those have become even stronger during the COVID-19 pandemic, is because we were forced to isolate so much that I think, especially the younger generation, has really leaned into these people they see on TikTok, on YouTube. But I think one of the things like I've encountered is just how accessible I am. I did content looking at a privacy policy of a particular business that was very egregious and concerning. And I made some videos about it. And then I started getting trolled. And I was able to very quickly figure out that it was a member of the family who was trolling me. It was this company, it was their family member. So that can be like, I actually think that's some of the scariest stuff. And what can you do? Right? Like I'm only one person. And yes, you can get a lawyer and they can advise you, etc. But yeah.
Yeah, and like public records of your house are available.
And I think what creates all of this is that, the social media networks have essentially curated like there's the content and then there's like the meta layer on top of the content. And a lot of cases, the audience reactions that snowball, part of it is genuine emotion. Like for example, reaction to the profile of Mr. Beast. Part of that might be genuine, like, oh, this is a creator I really want. This feels negative. I am therefore mad. But a lot of it seems to be that like seeing someone get canceled to an audience is entertaining, and people
Mm.
want to experience these narratives that unfold through the way that the audience interacts with things, and overwhelmingly those narratives are negative. It's like, let's cancel this person, or let's end this. Just recently, like, the latest controversy was these BuzzFeed employees who tried to move their content to a paywall streaming service. That led to a very strong audience reaction that certainly, I think, got to the level of, we just want to punish these people for trying to take their content behind a paywall and being greedy beyond what was genuinely warranted, but more so because it's entertaining to see a fall from grace to these audiences.
Yeah. And I mean, I think YouTube for a while, there was really like trafficking in that, right? There was a period of time where it was really intense with the apologies and the, dissing people and all of that. And I think um, it speaks to that line between, entertainment and news, right? Like, or we don't want to call it news, we can call it whatever, accountability work or whatever. But, um, you know, in this space, people are kind of primarily coming for entertainment, and then you're trying to sort of secretly give them some nutritious food
Yeah.
in the middle of it. But obviously, car wrecks are entertaining, right? And so it's a challenge for all of you, I'm sure, to like walk that line because it's tempting. I think you were talking about how you have to sometimes prevent yourself from like
Yeah.
responding.
Yeah, and there's a reason. So, to answer your other question, I was thinking about as the others were speaking. I mean, if at least in my sorry guys, at least in the work that I did, it's such a controversial, politically charged subject. Is that you have to have a thick skin. And that's what it is. I mean, if you don't, then it's not going to work. And I used to get nasty messages, as I said, every day. I got a death threat every day. Somebody promising to come find me and do things, and so you have to deal with that, and then you have to be okay with getting those messages. And the first time you read a message that says I should be hung for pushing these poisonous vaccines or be put to trial or Nuremberg 2.0, the first time you see a message like that, it's jarring, and you're like, what the hell's going? Why did I do this to myself? But then the thousandth time you read that message, it kind of becomes old, right? And it's all the same garbage at this point. It's a Pfizer shill, government shill, all these things. So it's all this really just the same old recycled threats, just designed to bully people into silence. And I've had some scary instances. I remember I made this video and I was in a hotel and somebody identified in my comment section which hotel I was staying at that night because they saw the reflection of another hotel in the window
Oh my
and
God.
they like identified it. And I'm like, holy, and I was in a different city too. And I was like, so they're like, I'm gonna come find you, right? And I'm like, so then, so the next morning, I'm about to leave. I'm like wearing a hoodie. I'm trying to like anonymize myself. Like I was like, nothing's gonna happen. But you never know. Some crazy person pops up, right, with the weapon. So it's only happened once, but since then it's been okay. And where I am now in northern rural Minnesota, it's really easy to identify me because the demographic of the place that I'm in is, I stand out. So that's one of my other fear. One of my other fears is that somebody's going to come find me as well. But thankfully that hasn't happened. But thick skin. I mean, it is what it is, and I have to be very very careful about how I respond to things. If you've seen TikTok, there's a very a lot of people. There's sort of these call out. We call them call out creators almost, which are people that will be very aggressive when they address other people and almost becomes personal, right? And it becomes like actually attacking other people. And I've always stayed away from that. So if I see something like that, somebody saying something is obviously wrong, I kind of address the information instead of ad hominem thing. So I'll be like, I will not comment on the appearance of anybody's appearance. I don't comment on how they speak. I don't comment on any personal attributes. I just say this person is wrong because X, Y, Z, and just give the information. That way I protect myself. That way nobody's going to come after me for libel or defamation or anything like that. And then also that way I get the information that I need to get out there. And also I stay away from TikTok drama. It's not for me. But
Yeah.
to each their own. People do their own things. But that's what
I
we're
do
doing.
want to acknowledge here that probably Taylor has suffered the
Yes.
most
Mhm.
online harassment, and we're
Very
sorry.
brave.
We're very sorry about that, and you are very brave.
Very
We have time for some questions from the audience. We have people in the room, and we also have people on Zoom. Do you want to start with online question, and then we'll go to the room?
Sure. So there's one online question here. I'll just read it right out. Librarians already focus on teaching critical thought about resources. I think sort of source resources, where to get information from. How can we continue to do that while including social media and discussions on trust and accountability?
Can I just say one quick plug? Libraries are being taken over by private equity. It's a huge problem. It's happening all across the country, and it's one of the ways in which they are, exerting control over book bans. So people who are public employees who had pensions, et cetera, are now becoming employees of basically private equity firms. They're doing a very good job at hiding it, but I am finding it. So I just want to also plug that very quickly. Correct. Well, yeah, exactly. They're basically contracted. Yeah, we can chat later. No, not New England. They're really focusing on, like primarily communities of color in really rural areas that are very underfunded already, and it's truly a way of book banning. Yeah.
Wow. Well,
Speaking,
Sorry, just kidding.
speaking of librarians, there's a very popular account called Librarian Michael.
Yes.
I don't know if you guys know about him. Library guy, amazing account. Everybody should follow that.
oh yeah, I love him.
He got a deal from
Um,
PBS, I think, or something recently. But
We have a question in the room. Somebody has the mic.
Hi, you talked a little bit about how the word influencer had gotten a negative connotation. I'm going to say why I think it has a negative connotation, and you can all disagree with me, which will be fun. Uh, when I hear the word, I think of people who suppress their authentic selves and are online in order to sell things and get money from the people who are making the things that they sell. Now, that's not any of the seven of you, but that's sort of that taints the term influencer and might cause people to not want to use it, even though what they're doing is in fact influencing people in a way that's very positive. Anyway, I'll just let you all riff
Yeah.
on that however you want.
I have some. Go ahead.
Well, no, what were you going to say? You start.
I do have strong thoughts about that too. Even like influencer, content creator, we talked about how we want to be referred to, and I'm cool with whatever the populace says. But as a person who came into this space truly as an educator and somebody who was trying to use the platform to help people, it's a little concerning for me because when I think of like the Kardashians and like I think of people who are just like the lifestyle reality show type stuff, and I'm trying to influence people to do what's right for society, yeah. But like even the term content creator, I think celebrities like in movies, they're influencers, right? The directors are content creators. I truly think I'm an educator who's using social media to teach, and I think that we pigeonhole all people who create on just because you post a public video doesn't mean you're a content creator. It's truly an art form, and I think that's why we're all here too. I think there should be categories to this. Like just because somebody records a song doesn't mean they're a singer.
Yeah, I mean, I define content creator as somebody who essentially has a media business built on the back of social platforms,
Mhm.
which I would argue all of you do. I really reject the notion that these people are not adding to the world. I get that the Kardashians, trust me, I could go on forever about them. They're also reality stars and other things. But, I reported a lot on the early days of beauty vlogging, which is a good example. All of these women were smeared viciously as vapid content creator. What are they doing but talking about makeup online? Someone like Michelle Phan is a good example. These women were meeting markets of the beauty industry that were previously unmet. A lot of them creating beauty products and beauty lines for women of color, fashion lines, whatever. So, and not all of them are doing that. Of course, there's the vapid, terrible ones in any industry, right? There's the most terrible journalists too. But I think that I think that the way the media covered the influencer industry, especially in the mid 2010s, as the marketing dollars really started to pour in, influencer is a term from the marketing industry that was applied to content creators. I think it really shaped the public perception where now you have these people just like, oh, I don't like that they're not serious. Those women, even in the most vapid women, I mean, I think of some of these, and I hate to call them vapid, honestly, but you know, they're like Chrissy Chalepka or whatever, I can never pronounce her name right, is a good example. She, sort of the founder of Bimbo Talk, of Bimbo, TikTok, whatever, has been open about doing sex work, been open about sort of like, you know, people refer to her very often as this like trope. This woman has built a six-figure business and a product line to meet that business, and I think that's where I think those businesses are worth taking seriously. You know, even if some of the people are dubious, and yes, a lot of them are selling hair gummies or scams and all this stuff. But I still think that in order to report on those scams and hold that industry accountable, we need to take it seriously enough to like.
I mean, I honestly feel like we take Consumer Reports seriously, right? They test cars. Why should we not take it seriously when a woman tries on 7 eyeshadows for us and tells us which one to buy? This is a science experiment. It's a sample size of 1. It's not statistically significant, but it is what we consider like sort of a service. We did that as journalists. We have personal tech columnists who review things based on their own opinion, and so I think honestly, but that well, I think that's an interesting question that we're exploring here on this panel is whether relying on your historical brand is always a marker of trust. I think with Consumer Reports, it is. I've been to their labs. It's very impressive. They have statisticians. I'm all in, right? But I also think that they were never serving the eyeshadow market, and women were getting duped on bad eyeshadows or whatever, right? And so, like, I think it's totally legitimate to be somebody who takes those areas that traditionally people thought of as not important markets because they were female markets or whatever, a group that
Or
nobody cared.
luxury. I mean, there
Right.
is a market, like there is, you know, there is like Departures magazine or whatever that's
Yeah.
about luxury travel. But when these women go out and monetize, you know, create their own business around luxury travel, that is then it's just, oh, she just you know, oh, she's just out for herself, or there's all these negative connotations around it.
I don't consider myself an influencer in the term that you. Oh, sorry. I don't consider myself an influencer as you described it in the sense that I'm not selling things, right? But I'll consider myself an educator, like you did. But also, we do influence people at the end of the day. But you know, I have no problem with people making money off of social media. I mean, if it's gainful employment, right? If they're not taking advantage of people, if they're not scamming people, if they want to sell makeup, good for you, right? I mean, I think a great analogy to this is Substack, right? Which is Substack has allowed people to have independent, their own sort of businesses of journalism. You don't have to work at the New York Times. You can make a lot more money having your own Substack. So independent and TikTok, you know, these businesses, these women have had opportunities now to make their own business. They may not have had these opportunities in the mainstream, sort of not media, but the mainstream way of doing it. Sorry. So if people want to make money, it's fine. But I have an issue with people that sell scammy supplements, people that advertise things, and at least in my field, advertise certain things as having benefits that they do not and are harmful. And that's what I have a problem with. And there's a lot of people that monetize their status, especially in the anti-vax world and you know anti-science world, monetize that status and gain commercial benefit, which I think is not acceptable. So to me, that's a problem.
And that's where you do your accountability work is calling that out. And
Absolutely.
Taylor does that too, calling out all sorts of bad actors on social media. The one I loved recently on your podcast was it called kindness influencers?
Oh yeah,
Kindness
the kindness
influencers?
influence.
These are people who set up fake scenarios.
The problem is they're not fake. They're using real impoverished and unhoused people, and they're filming kindness content where they're like, "Hey, Mister, you know, I'll give you $100 or whatever," and they're not getting consent. So I mean, Mr. Beast is a good example. He sort of pioneered a lot of this by giving away money on the internet. The thing that's different is he has always had people sign releases to be in his videos. These people are not, and this is a problem, especially with unhoused people being exploited for content. Those people are horrible. My feeling about the influencer industry is there are bad actors in every field, and we shouldn't dismissive field based
Right.
on just those
That's
facts.
what I was trying to point out, that you are the janitor of the social media. She's sweeping out the corners for us. We have another question from online.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions about measuring or sort of thinking about impact of the work that you do. So one is about, is there sort of external measures of impact of the kind of content that you're creating, particularly on youth, but also, other topics? And then just how do you think about impact and how do you measure it or track it?
That's such a good question.
My videos sometimes get millions of views. Sorry, I keep forgetting. I apologize. My videos will sometimes get millions of views, which is crazy to me because I literally spend 10 minutes in my car making a video on how coffee affects the heart or caffeine affects the heart. For me, it's routine work. It takes me 10 minutes, but I'll get 5,000 comments from people saying, "Oh, I never thought about it before," or 5,000 shares. But then I'll also get messages on a daily basis from people that say, "Hey, thanks to your videos, I didn't ignore my symptoms, and turns out I was having a heart attack and I got care." Or thanks to your videos, I pushed my dad to go get care and he had blockages and he got stented and he's alive. Thanks to you. So I get messages like that all the time, they make you feel good, right? And they really make you feel like you're having an impact. So I measure my impact, I guess, through messages and comments like that.
I could tell you two ways. So when I was in the class, and they called that a thankless job because as a teacher, you might not understand your impact until you see that kid later on in life and they tell you how much you impacted them. But even oftentimes, you can tell by a kid's facial expression, how they interact with you, how they talk to you afterwards, the impact. Content creation is very isolated.
Mhm.
Oftentimes creating in a silo by yourself in a car at home, and you're not having like a newsroom of people who can hold you accountable and say, "Ah, don't put that out, switch that up." You're just kind of like hoping, well, I hope this connects. Here you go, world. Let's see.
Exactly.
Right, so like you like the thing that really got to me was the first time somebody recognized me in public and they were like excited and I was just like, what are you doing right now? Like I'm in here grocery shopping with some sweatpants and stuff on. He's like, "Oh, this the dude from TikTok." And nobody ever knows my name. It's like the guy from TikTok, Instagram that talks about history. But like seeing that and seeing like a family though, like we love. I just can't imagine just scrolling through but I've done that with other people. Like you find a creator like maybe on YouTube and you just keep going and keep going. I think the thing that has helped me the most though, like the analytics are cool, but I had a young man one time send me a message and say that when he was going through chemotherapy, my videos helped him like, and not saying to cure the cancer, of course, right? But like saying that it helped him keep his mindset positive. And when you're posting that video, you just never think that on an individual level it's impacting somebody like that because even though we create individually, we consume individually too. So we don't realize the impact we have that way.
Miss Sam, you track probably more analytics because YouTube offers more analytics.
Yeah, although they're all imperfect. So it's like you really can't use, I mean, a lot of the trickiness around all of this is that one view does not equal another view in terms of its worth. I mean, especially platform to platform, different platforms, even, a view does not equal on any platform just clicking on a video. It's a different amount of watched and various stuff like that. So like literally it does not mean the same thing, but also even within a platform, the engagement for a single view varies dramatically. And this kind of like talking about earlier, often the way you can tell this is through ad dollars and through engagement on that way. But like, the views they essentially are a useless indicator for impact because it can vary by orders of magnitude. I think so. In terms of how I try to assess it, often it's through those off-platform things because you know that if someone has gone through the effort to take action off-platform, that means something. So sometimes, like for my videos, like if I get a lot of emails, which of course takes you gotta go through effort to write up a whole email, that's a good sign that it is hopefully at least engaged with some people. Sometimes they're engaged in negative manner, um, and then also of course like uh, getting recognized in public is another way. I'm a big fan of tweets of people watching my videos, like tweets of people showing themselves watching my videos, sometimes over dinner or something. But yeah, it's kind of impossible to assess, and the vast majority of the impact you'll never even know about,
Right.
which is tough.
I'm wondering, Wilcom, have you got any stats on bag sales declining after your
Not really. Like I didn't see or hear from any brand, but I seen in the comments that you save me so much money because I thought these were great and now I know and choose better, which makes me happy. That's my goal because some people just took marketing for granted and decided basically upon that. Now they have one more data point and decide which one they want to choose. And sometimes I actually like the impact on the things when it gets attention from the media, like traditional media. Like, for example, greenwashing is huge in leather space these days. Like, vegan leather is a term that's abused to the core. And people ask me my opinion on interviews, like Coachtopia. Coach is a company I love. Coachtopia is something I absolutely hate because I review their products and it was borderline greenwashing. I shared it, and then it attracted more questions from the media. And to me, that's the impact. Like these corporations are obviously in for money, and sometimes they go after trends and do things that are not really beneficial to the consumer, but they don't, of course, share that aspects. And when I share that, it gets response. That's the impact I like to see as well.
I mean, I think you are the janitor of the luxury bag industry, just like Taylor's the janitor of creators. Meredith, how about you?
Oh, well, I would say being invited to this. Like this for me was like, oh my gosh, what I'm doing matters. Yelling about private equity sometimes feels a little thankless. And I do get people who write in and are like, I bet you applied at Bain and didn't get the job. And I'm like, no, I knew not to go that far. But so to hear that, but I would say the thing that like hit me the most, the thing that really changed for me was I did a video about a small town in Missouri that was destroyed by Apollo Group, which is one of the biggest private equity firms. It was a factory town. They came in, they bought the factory, they destroyed it. It's one of my top performing videos. And it honestly gives me so much hope because sometimes I feel like we have to make so much content that you have to center and go, this is going to affect you. This is going to, this is why you need to see it. But to see all these people care about this small town in Missouri and then to hear from some of these people who were like, I lost my job. My dad lost his job. Like, from this factory. And no one has really given us a voice like that. And it was Gretchen Morgensen who highlighted them, who's an incredible journalist. But yeah, that was it for me.
One more from the audience here. We have 5 minutes, so we have to keep it tight.
Yeah, it works. Thank you everyone for being here. I'll start with a disclaimer that I'm a journalist. So I had two questions, and the questions are to all of the panelists. And I guess I want to get a sense of really like the meta picture of the industry and not of your individual experiences. So my first question is, as you guys said, that there are like social media began with democratizing information and making it easier to hold people accountable. But do you think it has now reached a space where the number of content creators that you have online who can say anything and can have influence and are not themselves held accountable makes that space more dangerous than before, or more dangerous than perhaps traditional media outlets? And the second is, in conjunction to that, like with the Israel-Gaza conflict, we've seen a lot of online influencers just call out, let's say, like the New York Times repeatedly to say, well, that's just a bias organization. Now, to an extent, I agree that there is some sort of, as a journalist from covering the global south, I do think that there is a bias in Western media. But very often I've also seen that, some of that calling out is just, it's not really justified, but nobody can hold these people to account because they have millions of followers. So the minute you say the New York Times had a bias headline, this is what the headline is, without explanation of why it's really biased, and then you have thousands of people saying, yes, it is, boycott the New York Times, boycott the Washington Post, etc. What are your thoughts, I guess, on sort of how social media or online influencers can work with traditional media platforms and vice versa?
So I can answer the second part of your question. And as a physician, right, I have personal views on the conflict, but as a physician, I have covered it from a humanitarian perspective, in the medical disaster perspective. I've had people, I've seen what you're describing, when people just pile on. There's a name for that. It's called the TikTok mob. It basically is mob culture on TikTok that exists. They will literally, once you decide that X person is no longer worthy of attention, literally mobs will descend on their profile and start attacking them, dox them, things like that. Whether it's for a good reason or not, that's a different situation. That's a different question, actually. I've actually made several videos where I have directly confronted content made by other people saying that, they're pro X, right? I've said that this is not the way to do it because they are either attacking other creators for something or they are portraying things in a way that is, I think it is wrong, right? There are ways of advocacy. There's ways to advocate, but you know, what is too far is too far. And in my opinion, anyway, and I have made videos calling them out by name saying you should not do this. I'll stitch their videos saying this is wrong. It damages the cause, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I've had people come after me. Like I've had people sent after me commenting nasty things like you're, a Zionist or this or that or whatever. And I'm like, have you even, but anyway, that's besides the point. So it is important to hold people to account, right? And it is when there are creators that talk about things, a lot of them will get carried away, right? So it's important to be passionate, but also important not to be completely blinded by your passion. And we're not a cult. You can think for yourself. So I think how holding people accountable is important. I do it in the way that I think is important. People may disagree with it, and that's okay.
I just want to say, as a journalist, and especially, I think that's why those news organizations need to engage directly with those creators. I mean, I think also explaining headlines specifically, like when we have a whole audience team at the Washington Post that has tried to work with content creators or say, here's why we actually have to use that. So many times, as we all know in the newsroom, it's legal reasons. But I think that's just, I think a huge reason that these places have lost trust is because there is no accountability and they post something that can have great harm, right? And there's no acknowledgement of that harm or acknowledgement of wrongdoing or correction in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I mean, it's like sort of like when, Ernest and Wilcom were saying when they post something, they immediately go engage with the comments, and that culture is not there with news outlets generally. They don't really always engage with their critics, and New York Times got rid of their ombudsman, right? So I think that the lack of a conduit for that conversation, I think, just it makes the trust more difficult. And I understand the reasons too. It's actually very hard resource wise to like have a whole team engaging with the amount of content the New York Times puts out every day. That's a lot. You would need a lot of people. So I understand why it's difficult to do that, but it does have a cost, I think, in terms of trust because there are trade-offs. I mean, a lot of the times the reason the Times headlines or the Post headlines are written that way is because of the way they have to fit into the space on the print paper, which no one ever thinks about, right? But there's like this strange constraint from the ancient times.
I also think it's getting harder and harder for content creators to call out power. Like you're mentioning, I think there was this era of like blogging and this sort of like liberatory thing where suddenly there's the Arab Spring and Black Lives Matter movement, all this. And now I think in the past few years, we're seeing this erosion of speech generally, but also just like options. You have Meta censoring, or not censoring, I know it's not the right word, but downranking political content. There's fewer and fewer platforms to choose from. There used to be so many more options. I think Twitter is obviously sort of totally.
Twitter, is run by somebody who literally deletes the accounts of people who critique him. So, we are in an era where the platforms are exercising their power to restrain speech. And I think we do have to end on that really tragically sad note. But I really think you guys are all a beacon of hope. So I hope your voices keep shining through even as your platforms disappear underneath you.